Wilhelm Reich did not believe sexual education was about health or safety. The sexual revolution and its insistence on including children in their revolution is not merely about politics or philosophy, it's about theology. If Wilhelm Reich is correct that sexually liberating minors is the most powerful tool in training them to resist authority, then the revolution will inevitably resist and attack the ultimate authority, God. Guys, today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most perverted, neglected, and forgotten pontiffs of progressivism, high priests of secularism, whose damage on the 20th and 21st century sexual revolution and its obsession with destroying children cannot be overstated. Wilhelm Reich, an Austrian psychologist who, shocker, studied under Sigmund Freud. Wilhelm Reich should properly be considered the sexual father of cultural Marxism, who came before Alfred Kinsey. It's impossible to overstate how embedded and laundered his ideas are in modern American science, our educational system, and the modern leftist playbook. This is why at the Seth Gruber Show, we work so hard. I work so hard. And I think we do maybe some of the best work in the conservative movement on tracing ideas back to origins. We cannot defeat the evil in our culture without knowing the origins of it. That's why Hilaire Belloc said to comprehend the history of a thing is to unlock the mysteries of its present and more to discover the profundities of its future. Let's put it this way. A civilization that cannot protect its children cannot long protect anything else either. Wilhelm Reich may be the key, not just to understanding Kinsey and the sexual revolution, but to understanding our current revolutionaries' obsession with the most dark aspect of progressivism, their obsession with sexualizing children. Guys, check out Gruberware. Gruberware in the episode notes. We got shirts like former fetus, sassy since conception, I identify as trans vaccinated. You know you need a shirt to start conversations when the football game's on and your friends and family are coming over, or wear it to church if you really want to be spicy. Give us a rating and review to help us reach more people. It really means so much to us. We've been loving reading some of the reviews on the show. Thank you guys. When I read these things of like what the show has meant to people, how it's mobilized them, how it's changed their families, like some people have planted new churches because of this show. I'm like blown away. The Lord is so good. And so if you haven't done so, go to iTunes, Podcast, or Spotify, hit 5 stars. And then on iTunes, I don't think Spotify lets you write in a review. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys can let me know. But on iTunes, if you got an iPhone, write in a review. And all that makes the show fly up the charts. And we really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe at YouTube and Rumble to protect this show. Let's get into it. This is the Seth Gruber Show. Who are the high priests of progressivism, the pontiffs of progressivism, the architects of sexual revolution and domination? There is so much that American citizens have forgotten. We have forgotten much about our heritage, our legacy, our founding, the ideas that animated our republic, and the warring of ideologies that, left unchecked, has always led to the death of civilizations and societies. Warfare is not new. Bad ideas are not new. Evil men who want to diddle kids is not new. What unfortunately is relatively new in our republic is the forgetfulness of her people, the amnesia of Americans. And so much of what we're facing in our republic today has escalated just within the last century, within the 20th century. We've discussed a lot of these figures on the show before. We've discussed a lot of these figures in my book and film, The 1916 Project. But one of the more forgotten figures, frankly, someone I wanted to do a whole expose on in The 1916 Project, but you just don't have the time without writing an absolute, behemoth of a book. One of the most neglected, but probably most influential figures in the sexual revolution and its marriage to cultural Marxism is Wilhelm Reich, perhaps one of the most dangerous proteges of the Frankfurt School. And let's call him the sexual father of cultural Marxism. Marx and Lenin were sexual perverts, but Wilhelm Reich was a sexual mastermind, and that wasn't a good thing. The listener has probably noticed the interesting cultural relationship between the cultural Marxists of the 21st century and weird sex obsessions. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, if you're a semi-devoted reader as a conservative Christian, you've probably noticed this relationship. And that connection is not coincidental. Wilhelm Reich, like Margaret Sanger, like Emma Goldman, like Simone de Beauvoir, like so many of the communists of the early 20th century during the same time period, saw and viewed supercharged sex as the accelerant that the revolution needed to accomplish its utopian goals. So guess who coined the term sexual revolution? We always say that, right? Like, oh, when did all this evil begin? And like the normal American might be like, the sexual revolution, the sexual revolution. Well, that term didn't just pop out of the ground. Somebody coined it, Wilhelm Reich. And in doing so, Reich systematized for future revolutionaries the key elements that created the bloodbath of the French Revolution. Sexual anarchy and the revolutionary impulse. The two had to be brought together once again. This was Wilhelm Reich's view of tearing down Western civilization and ushering in, quote unquote, sexual freedom. According to Wilhelm Reich's sexual and political philosophy, I guess you could say the Marquis de Sade and Maximilien Robespierre were thinking too small. And so Reich and his subsequent proteges were here to architect a new sex revolution. When did Wilhelm Reich do this? He is the predecessor to Alfred Kinsey. And we'll talk more about that in today's show. He was the weird, sex-obsessed, pederast-minded revolutionary before Kinsey. But most people know who Kinsey is, or they've heard the name. Reich has been largely forgotten, and the answer to why we will get into today. It's very sick and interesting. His goal was to create the Edenic paradise that the French failed to bring about. Wilhelm Reich, the guy was a total weirdo, absolute sicko. He even conceived of sex and orgasms as able to cure diseases. That like if people could just have enough orgasms, cancer would disappear, he said. Mental illnesses would disappear. I'm not kidding. Frederick Engels, right? Marx and Engels, right? By the way, Engels actually wrote most of the Communist Manifesto and organized it. Engels once observed in an essay called The Book of Revelation, he said that, quote, with every great revolutionary movement, the question of free love comes into the foreground. And Engels thought that this development was, he called, quote, curious. Interesting. Not sure why. This is what Engels wrote. Why is it that with revolutionary movements, the question of free love comes to the forefront? Well, Wilhelm Reich did not think that that was curious. He understood exactly why sexual liberation inevitably accompanies political revolution. And he believed it was essential to its success. Sexual revolution being essential to the success of the revolution. E. Michael Jones notes this interesting thing that Reich kind of saw himself as a revolutionary Joshua. leading the nation into a sexualized promised land. And that wasn't just like a metaphor. Reich believed that dismantling traditional sexual norms, and this is important, especially those governing children, was a prerequisite for overthrowing authoritarian social structures. So unsurprisingly, this logic led Wilhelm Reich to advocate for the sexualization of children, a move that he saw not as perversion, but as a political necessity. We've done whole episodes on this show before about the sexualization of children, why that's a key aspect of the trans movement, right? Where those ideas came from. The pederasts in the 20th century who were trying to normalize these beliefs. Alfred Kinsey's obsession with providing a scientific paradigm for the sexualization of children. One of the episodes we did on this show, an entire episode on Alfred Kinsey. Maybe, I'm sure my team will remember the episode number. I don't remember it, but maybe we can link it in the show notes. We went down the rabbit hole, like some of the most disgusting aspects of Kinsey's architectural influence on the sexual revolution. And in the middle of that episode, I started losing my voice. And then at the end of the episode, I had my voice back. Like when you start talking about this stuff, it's very spiritual. It's very demonic. Okay. And because most Americans and American Christians do not know virtually anything about the rotten seed, and I actually want to say like the demonic seed. Like I want to make the argument that Reich and Kinsey and these other individuals that we've gotten into before on the show, that they were actually being influenced by 100% demonic forces, demons assigned to shape their thinking and normalize demonic perversions. Okay. But Reich systematizes much of this before it becomes smuggled into the liberal project via science and data with Kinsey. And so the formula historically is always consistent. Eros plus power minus ethics equals danger, especially for the most vulnerable, being children. This is a point that Os Guinness makes. And Wilhelm Reich makes these intentions unmistakably clear in his book, wait for it, The Sexual Revolution. Okay, so he wrote a book called that, okay. I just want to read you a segment. We might read one or two segments today, but if you want to understand the sexual revolution in the 21st century, Wilhelm Reich is probably more significant in understanding the sexual obsessions of our cultural Marxists today than even Alfred Kinsey, because Reich shaped Kinsey's thinking before Kinsey became famous or infamous. But first, we want to thank one of our incredible sponsors of the Seth Gruber Show, Every Life Diaper Company. This is America's pro-life diaper company, y'all. You know what's great is when conservatives stop whining and moaning about evil and then they go do something about it. That's what my friends, who are personal friends, who founded Every Life Diaper did. They went and built an alternative with quality baby supplies, diapers, wipes, baby shampoos, lotions, and now a line of fem care. Quality, not woke, pro-America, pro-family, pro-life. And that's because we found all these companies just funding and celebrating the most evil stuff the last few years, right? Especially 2020 and 2021. Our friends at Every Life found that almost every major American diaper company is pro-abortion. The baby brands celebrate the baby killing and they pay their employees to go travel and kill their babies. You need to go to everylife.com. Use promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order. If you have babies and you need wipes and diapers, or your church or your friends are having babies, tell them. No more coterie, okay? No more huggies, okay? No more Hellabella. Go to everylife.com. Promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order. Let them know that we sent you. That's important. And let's make America pro-life again. While all of us having the most babies only buy our diapers from everylife.com. Thank you. Here's what Reich writes. He says, in contrast, a child whose motor activity is completely free and whose natural sexuality has been liberated in sexual play will oppose strictly authoritarian aesthetic influences. He writes, political reaction can always compete with revolutionary education in the authoritarian superficial influencing of children, but it can never do so in the realm of sexual education. No reactionary ideology or political orientation can ever accomplish for children what a social revolution can with respect to their sexual life. We thus see the revolutionary structuring of the child must involve the freeing of his biological sexual motility. This is indisputable, period. Okay, well, that's not easy to listen to. That's why we gave you a warning in the introduction. This is not an accidental aside, folks. For Wilhelm Reich, sexual liberation, beginning in childhood, was the engine of permanent revolution. And this passage, this perverted, disgusting, hard to listen to passage we've just read, is chilling precisely because it is so methodical. He is not speaking poetically or provocatively. He's laying out a strategy. Reich's core assumption is sexual restraint trains children to accept authority, while sexual liberation trains them to resist it. And so Reich believed that discipline, hierarchy, tradition, and obedience all depend on delayed gratification, on self-control. Remove those restraints early, and authority itself becomes emotionally intolerable. But Reich goes further. He argues that while political movements can compete with one another through symbols like marches, songs, uniforms, slogans, they cannot compete on sexual formation. Why? Because political ideas can be challenged, political ideas can be debated, they can be rejected, they can be criticized, but sexual experience cannot. His point is that once boundaries are crossed, there is no return to innocence. The change is permanent. This is why Reich treats sexual liberation as more powerful than schools, laws, or propaganda, because ideas shape the mind. Sexual experience reshapes the instincts. It reaches beneath reason, beneath argument, and beneath conscience. So for Wilhelm Reich, that makes it the most effective tool available for what he called, remember, the revolutionary structuring of the child. This is important because Reich was not talking about education in any traditional sense that we understand it today. He was not concerned with protecting children or cultivating virtue or guiding moral development. In his framework, the child is not a person to be formed, but a revolutionary asset to be deployed. So sexual liberationists who followed Wilhelm Reich adopted the same logic. If you shape a child's instincts early enough, then resistance to authority becomes automatic. And that's not accidental. That's not naive. Reich understood something fundamental. A civilization that cannot protect its children cannot long protect anything else either. By targeting sexual boundaries at their weakest and most formative stage, childhood, he believed the revolution could be made permanent. That is why Friedrich Engels' curious fact was not curious at all to Wilhelm Reich. Sex always shows up first because it dissolves the moral framework required to resist everything else that follows. And this is why the sexual revolution and its insistence on including children in their revolution is not merely about politics or philosophy, it's about theology. Guys, this company is amazing. I was going to say something. I'm done turning on the TV and seeing gay couples with children. Obviously, we don't even turn the TV on around the kids, but you turn on something, you're at an airport, it's just everything's gay. Am I crazy for not wanting my children to read about other children change their genders because their pedophile-leaning parent wants them to? No, this is why I needed Brave Books. They create stories, like really good stories, that kids actually want to read, but unlike the junk coming out of Hollywood, these stories are intentionally designed to build biblical conviction and moral clarity and courage from an early age. We need brave children, right? That's why you got to go to Brave Books. They reinforce timeless truths like the sanctity of life and God-given identity and the fruits of the Spirit. And through encouraging stories and hands-on family activities and scripture woven into every book, your children can have fun, celebrate narrative and story, and actually be formed to stand against this culture. And when you join the Brave Book Club, a new book is delivered to your door every month. And you also get free access to Brave Plus. Brave Plus. Did you know about this? It's incredible. It's their streaming platform filled exclusively with parent-approved content that actually supports a biblical worldview. I think this is a must for all families. This is a no-brainer, because if we don't disciple our children, the culture gladly will. And Brave Books is providing resources for us to be the kind of parents the Lord calls us to be. And just for my listeners, you can get 20% off your order today. 20% off your order today. Go to bravebooks.com, bravebooks.com/Seth, my name. And then use code Seth. Again, that's bravebooks.com/Seth, and use code Seth for 20% off your first order today. We love Brave Books, and you will too. If Wilhelm Reich is correct, that sexually liberating minors is the most powerful tool in training them to resist authority, then the revolution will inevitably resist and attack the ultimate authority, God. And Reich was clear about this. Here's another line from Wilhelm Reich. This is going to sound so bonkers, but if you'd like, I could give you the citation of the book. I have Reich's works. They're very disturbing to read. I have to cleanse my mind or read Narnia or something when I get home after studying too much Wilhelm Reich. But here's a line from Wilhelm Reich. He said, "Children do not believe in God. It is when they have to learn to suppress the sexual excitation that goes hand in hand with masturbation that the belief in God generally becomes embedded in them." Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's sick. This sick observation might be easy to misread or understand. We need to slow down and just understand what this sexual father of cultural Marxism just said. Reich is not saying that children reason their way to God through doctrine or argument. He's saying that self-restraint trains the soul toward transcendence. So learning to govern one's desires, especially powerful sexual desires, conditions a child to accept limits, to accept authority, to accept a moral order. In Reich's view, God becomes believable, not solely because he is taught, but because the child's inner world has been structured to recognize authority above the self. When human desires are disciplined rather than indulged, people learn that freedom exists within boundaries, not outside them. God is encountered not as the enemy of joy, but as the source of it. Obedience produces trust, and trust deepens belief. Reich saw this dynamic and concluded it had to be broken. If sexual restraint strengthens belief in God, then sexual liberation, especially in childhood, must weaken it. That was his logic. All human conflict is therefore ultimately theological. As E. Michael Jones explains, Reich immediately grasped the political consequences of this sick insight. Encouraging children to masturbate was not about pleasure or health. It was about a way of blocking their capacity to believe in God. Once God was removed, paternal authority lost its grounding. Once the father's authority collapsed, the moral order followed. And once the moral order was dissolved, the state itself became vulnerable. So for Wilhelm Reich, masturbation was a way of bringing down the state. And with an estimated 1 in 10 Gen Z women prostituting themselves on OnlyFans, Reich's argument is hard to disagree with. J.D. Unwin's observation that total sexual freedom always precipitates cultural collapse, and after collapse replacement, should be ringing in our ears like a gong. Reich understood what became an essential aspect of the sexual revolution, that inciting youngsters to a sexual frenzy is directly related to driving a wedge between children and parents. Sexual liberation becomes a weapon to break down the family. Laying siege to God's created order is always more effective in the revolutionary playbook than debating God's existence. Let me say that again. Laying siege to God's created order is always more effective in the revolutionary playbook than debating God's existence. And by the way, Wilhelm Reich openly said this. He said, "We do not discuss the existence or non-existence of God. We merely eliminate the sexual repressions and dissolve the infantile ties to the parents." A wedge between parents and their children. There you have it. Sexualize children and drive a wedge between children and parents. Wilhelm Reich knew that traditional sexual morality, particularly Christian sexual ethics, produced psychological repression that sustained what he called authoritarian structures. Authoritarian structures meaning like your parents were given to you by the Lord, and you're blessed when you live according to the boundaries that they ask you to. Destroy sexual restraint, though, and the family would collapse. Destroy the family, and Christianity would lose its primary means of cultural transmission. Without Christianity, the revolution would become inevitable. And Karl Marx smiles in hell. These are Wilhelm Reich's 3 fundamental claims: that sexual repression creates authoritarian personalities, that sexual liberation produces political resistance, and that children must be sexually liberated early to ensure the permanent revolution. Guys, this June 5th and 6th in Colorado, Mile High City, baby, believers from across the nation are gathering for The Last Stand, a powerful, spirit-filled 2-day event of worship, fellowship, and fearless teaching. And this year, we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of America and casting vision on how the church must move now to save our nation. This isn't just another event. It's a mobilization of the church and the next generation to finish the fight for life and family in a culture that has lost its way. And with speakers like Ali Beth Stuckey and Dr. Frank Turek and Dr. George Grant and Victor Marx and more, this is the moment to rise up, unite, and declare life over this generation. So get your ticket for The Last Stand by going to thelaststand.com, thelaststand.com, and use code Seth, my name, for 20% off your ticket. I'll see you in Colorado on June 5th and 6th, 2026. Reich did not believe sexual education was about health or safety. He believed it was about political formation. Are you starting to see how he is the progenitor of the sexual revolution, architecting it before it came with Woodstock and the Flower Children? Sex was a pre-political lever for Reich, more powerful than law, religion, or reason. Sexual formation precedes political allegiance in Reich's playbook. Well, Wilhelm Reich was a little bit too bonkers and crazy, even for the liberal establishment, the scientific organizations. He was eventually exiled, but his ideas were not. He was imprisoned in the US. His books were burned by the FDA. His name became associated with extremism and abuse. But ideas don't need authors once they're useful. Why is Wilhelm Reich so significant? Why are we talking about him today? Because his ideas were intellectually laundered into the scientific organizations, the higher sciences, the university systems, and eventually laid the groundwork for Alfred Kinsey's pedophilic obsession with sexualizing children. Alfred Kinsey did not cite Wilhelm Reich very frequently, but completely operationalized his assumptions. Kinsey collapsed ethical categories into merely statistics. He treated child sexual behavior as observational data, and he reframed restraint as cultural conditioning. Reich might have said sexual repression creates fascists, but Kinsey said sexual restraint is socially constructed. Same conclusion. Updated language. Academic camouflage. So sex is no longer moral, which is Reich's observation. It's biological, Kinsey's observation. Children are no longer protected, they become subjects. Kinsey merely smuggled Reich's logic into any number of our various institutions that shape culture and education and laws. The Frankfurt School is an interesting layer to all of this as well. Frankfurt School thinkers, especially Herbert Marcuse, completed this sort of transition. Marcuse's idea of repressive tolerance was crucial to the sexual revolution. It declared traditional sexual norms as inherently oppressive. It redefined protection, restraint, and parental authority as violence. And it justified dismantling norms for the sake of liberation. Wilhelm Reich provided the sexual psychology. Herbert Marcuse provided the political ethics. And together they made sexual liberation a moral imperative rather than just a deviant theory. The breakdown came when the people smuggling Reich's logic into science and education stopped talking about revolution and started talking about health. This is the institutional entry. Education, not revolution. So enter organizations like SIECUS, the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States, founded in 1964 by Planned Parenthood's medical director, Mary Calderone. SIECUS and its allies embedded Reich's assumptions into sex ed under new labels. So Reich's language was one of sexual repression. The sexuality education that became so quickly rampant in America's public schools reshamed it as sexual shame. Right. You shouldn't have any shame. There's no sexual behaviors that's off the books. Reich focused on liberation. The sex ed industrial complex focused on self-expression. Reich's language focused on authority. Any authority in the moral or sexual sphere was wrong. The sex ed industrial complex focused on harm. Reich focused on innocence, destroying innocence early. The sex ed industrial complex focused on ignorance. You just don't know. You haven't tried it. You don't know it's good for you. Reich focused on moral limits being obliterated. The sex ed industrial complex was obsessed with stigmas. Notice what's missing in this entire intellectual laundering. Ethics, whether it's right or wrong. The child is no longer a moral subject to be formed in the sexual revolution, but a sexual subject to be affirmed. And this is where you begin to see, like, the language, by the way, in the sex ed revolution, the comprehensive sexuality education of age appropriate. Have you heard that language before? That becomes the Trojan horse to smuggle all of these assumptions into our education. Reich insisted that sexual formation must begin early. And by sexual formation, he meant he wanted children to masturbate. He wanted children to be experiencing what he called, quote unquote, sexual play. But modern sex ed agrees with this, but replaces the word sexualization with age appropriate exposure, quote unquote. And this does several things, by the way. It prevents debate, right? Because who could argue with things being age appropriate? It decouples sex from morality, and it overrides parental authority with professional authority. And this is the piece that Kinsey provides later. Don't you know? The science has shown, the professional studies have shown that children are actually sexual from the infantile stage, and most of them masturbate. And these were all lies based off of fraudulent data. But this gets used to shift America's thinkings, starting in the classroom, regarding sexuality. Reich wanted the state and experts to outflank parents. Our modern sexuality frameworks do this administratively rather than rhetorically. By the way, once psychology and medicine endorse a framework, resistance becomes unscientific. You're just not following the science. Organizations like the American Psychological Association, right, the APA, gradually absorb all these assumptions. The sexual identity is discovered, not guided. That restraint causes harm. Very Freudian, by the way. Affirmation is therapeutic and boundaries are suspect. At this stage, Wilhelm Reich no longer needs to be quoted because his premises are embedded into all of our scientific institutions. But Wilhelm Reich disappears from the footnotes. This is important. How can I argue that he's so authoritative if he's missing from the scientific literature? He is absent not because he was wrong, but because he was too honest, even for the liberal establishment. Reich said that children must be sexually liberated for political ends. He said that authority must be undermined. He said that ethics must be bypassed. But what does modern sex ed say? Well, the same thing, just not so honest. Children must be affirmed for their well-being, quote unquote. Authority must be shared. Ethics are personal. It's the same architecture. Same structuring, just different paint. Reich's central insight that sexual formation in childhood determines political allegiance was retained by our liberal establishment, while his revolutionary language was removed and replaced with therapeutic language, scientific language. That is how his ideas survived. Why does this matter? Because you cannot understand the sexual revolution and the modern sex ed conflicts in our schools that's sexualizing children unless you see that they are not primarily about biology. They are about authority versus autonomy, about formation versus affirmation, about parents versus the experts, about ethics versus instincts. Wilhelm Reich understood what's become the most central aspect of today's sexual liberationists and sex cult globalists, that sex is never neutral. And so does the system that quietly adopted his ideas while pretending the whole time that they never heard his name. If you bring up Wilhelm Reich with leftists, especially with like leftist academics, right? All the leftists with all their Substacks and all their articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Those people get pretty uncomfortable and they have their talking points to dismiss him. But his ideas about the revolutionary structuring of the child through masturbation and sexual play have been smuggled into the entire scientific, authoritative liberal systems. They're walking and delivering his playbook step by step. Yeah. Wilhelm Reich was obsessed with child sex, wanted to normalize it, thought children should be encouraged in that. And that wasn't just about his own pedophilic excitements. That was about creating revolutionaries who would oppose any attempts to restrain the revolution. I've wanted to do an episode on him for a while. Don't read too much of his stuff. I don't know. You open yourself up to some weird things if you dwell on that too long. Reich may be one of the most disturbing academics of the last 100 years. of the last 120 years. And his footprint, his fingerprints on the modern leftist movement are basically impossible to overstate. He operationalizes all of the sexual liberation strategies before Alfred Kinsey systematizes them and smuggles them into the sexual revolution, the sexual education movement, and the Planned Parenthood industrial complex. Wilhelm Reich is truly the sexual father of cultural Marxism. We don't even have time to get into his biography, all the weird stuff that he was doing as a kid and as a young man. But it's dark stuff, but it's essential if we're to understand how to resist evil in our day, reform this great country, and plant this flower of civilization that we've been given back into the soil that made her great. When we do that, as my mentor George Grant always says, we begin the process of resistance and reformation. Head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Give the show a rating and review, guys. We really appreciate it. It means so much to us. It really expands the reach of this show. And we love hearing your thoughts about this show. So make sure you hit 5 stars. Write in your review on iTunes podcast. What this show's meant to you, why you like it, why you tell others to listen to it. We might read it out on the show. Subscribe at YouTube if you like watching shows. And Rumble, help us build that platform over there. Help build my channel over there for the Seth Gruber Show, because YouTube doesn't always like this show. Shocker. It's because of a bunch of gay communists at Google on YouTube. That's why. Head on over to the whiterose.life and join us as an ally. You join at $35 a month, get a battle box in the mail, become a pro-life ninja. Join our app where you can access everything behind the paywall at our White Rose app at $35 a month. $70 a month, the book club, Books in the Barracks. We read books together, talk about them live on Zoom with yours truly, and get a free ticket to The Last Stand. Before that opportunity is lost to you, we give you a window of time as allies to get a free ticket to The Last Stand. Go to thelaststand.com to join us for The Last Stand and the worldwide premiere of The Last Stand film on June 5th and 6th in Denver, Colorado. For all things mobilization, training, education, go to thewhiterose.life. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.